Hi everyone, I'm Colleen Marie Payton with the Pasadena Literary Alliance. We're a nonprofit organization that raises funds for literary programs like Write Girl and PEN America's Emerging Voices. Today, we are thrilled to host this conversation between two fantastic authors, Stan Robinson and Barbara Kingsolver. So without further ado, welcome Barbara and Stan. We're so excited to hear what you have to say. The floor is yours. Take it away.
Well, Barbara, this is our first meeting, and I just want to say I am a new convert from last summer when I read Unsheltered, your most recent novel, and also at the very same time, my wife and I were driving across the country, and we listened to you reading Prodigal Summer. So it was a fabulous introduction to one of our great novelists. I loved those books, and it was weirdly great to read both at once, listening to you with one and reading the latest one. And we can talk more about it later, but what great books, and it's really an honor to be talking to you as one of America's great novelists of our time.
Well, I feel exactly the same way. I'm a huge fan. Ministry for the Future is one of the great books I've read in recent years. I was just I'm completely taken with it. And thank you for your kind words about Unsheltered and Prodigal Summer. I feel like I should apologize to you for a Barbara Kingsolver immersion. That seems like a little much to have both of those at once. But something that really struck me, and I could spend an hour telling you all of the things that I really loved about the Ministry for the Future. But something that really struck me about it is that Unsheltered, and my novel Unsheltered and your novel The Ministry for the Future are very similar in a weird in completely different manifestations, completely different execution, different genre. I suppose you could say, but we were both trying to grapple with this moment of the necessity of paradigm shift and how you can't fix the fix we're in by tinkering a little bit with, or even a lot with the systems that we have. You can't get there by by honoring the religion of capitalism, the market, and the devotion to permanent growth. You just can't. So I kept thinking about how we had come into this big question in our different ways and came up with two very different books about kind of the same thing.
Yeah, I felt similarly. And in fact, listening to Prodigal Summer and then reading Unsheltered in different ways. Prodigal Summer, I'd say to my wife, this woman is a science fiction writer because of this teaching the readers concepts of ecology and the necessity for human beings to live in this biosphere well. And the way that you structured it reminded me, but it was so ever so skillful, of getting in information into a novel so that your characters caring about it teach each other about it and have to grapple with the problems involved. But there's a lot of science in your novels. And then with Unsheltered, it was precisely this problem. The title is great, of the precariat, that they were precarious in 1850 and they were working on evolution. So again, there's science history. And in a way, it's a kind of a time travel story because it's the same house. So you're doing this is another science fiction trope in a way, but also the way it's not working for ordinary people, and that it can't go on, and what can't go on won't go on. So we're headed for big changes. So there were a lot of resonances there across the board. And I particularly, and this is kind of a technical thing, but just talking to another novelist, to manage to get that much scientific information in without blowing up the frame as I often do myself. But it's such a skillful novelist's approach to weaving stories that are not just about people, but about people and place and people and other creatures.
And people and physics and people and ecosystems. Yeah, well, I was supposed to be a scientist. I studied biology in college and in graduate school. I wanted to write. I've always loved reading and writing fiction, but I mean, who makes a living doing that, right? That was a pipe dream. So I studied biology, but I just couldn't stop writing. But I feel I mean, we're a very small club, novelists who write about science. I mean, like really small. If we convened that club, I'm not sure how many more people would be in this room. Uh,
Yeah.
we might have the majority vote. So yeah, that's a craft question and a technical question of how how I, because it is a small club, I feel kind of this mission to get science to write literature about science because it's a painless and enjoyable way to sort of increase the science literacy of the commons. But and so there are all these technical ways that you go about it. I tend to think, well, the main thing you can do is put in a lot of sex, because people, I mean, because that's what biology is anyway. And so that was kind of my main approach in Prodigal Summer. It's a very sexy book. I mean, everything is having sex, including the people. So and so that's kind of a standby. If you make it sexy, people will be interested. And so I was thinking about, in Ministry for the Future, I kept waiting. There the closest we get to sex in this book is from the point of view of a carbon atom.
Well, yeah,
Right?
yeah. Well,
but you used other methods. It's very, very engaging.
well, I have, I mean, my novels in the past, I've felt like I don't want to write about violence. And our culture, Hollywood, that really stories are circling around sex and violence. If I want to avoid violence, maybe I should have more sex. And so my novels through the years have very often included a healthy dose of sex to give the charge of learning about other people and relationships and all that. So that's been policy through my career. But with Ministry for the Future, I was in an odd situation because my central two characters it was transgressive enough to write about a friendship that begins with a kidnapping. That felt weird and transgressive and scary. So I thought about, I mean, I read about Stockholm syndrome, I read about Lima syndrome, and I thought, I'm scared for a good reason here. This is an interesting relationship. It will hold all the rest of the stuff that is in Ministry, but for sure it would be unnatural, not right. I could just feel that if these two characters even becoming friends is quite a stretch.
Yeah.
And so this novel is, in fact, it's only the carbon atom that is still banging around. But yes, I think Prodigal Summer is a very sexy book, and Unsheltered is stressed out by pressures that are so intense that they take over, and so there's strong feelings, and it's great that it's 19th century where you have what they called the particular friend. So, and this could be same sex or it could be opposite sex, which helped to finesse married people. But your particular friend was a bit more than a friend, a special friend. And so you used that, I noticed, in Unsheltered. And I think that's one way I can conceptualize my Mary and Frank also.
Yeah.
I'm noticing that you're a historical novelist. You have the novel about Frida Kahlo, which I want to read, and Unsheltered is a historical novel.
Mm-hmm.
And more than once, this I think combines with science, that the novel can carry a big weight of information. It can do more than just relationship stuff, and I
Mm-hmm.
see you doing that all the time. And it adds heft. It adds meaning to a novel to be more than then more than the personal lives of the protagonists, but also their relationships to society and to the world and to the planet. And yeah.
Well, of course, because ultimately it's the relationships to the world and the planet and to history and to the environment. Those are the things that I really want to write about. But the relationships, the characters, ultimately are the driver of a novel. And the territory of literature really is the human psyche. So that's how we get in, and that's how we engage a reader, to keep turning the pages and then gradually kind of invest the characters with these larger questions. But I mean, if it were just going to be about the relationships between two people that I made up, I don't even really know why bother other readers with that. I mean, they're not even real. So, who cares what they do? It only becomes important and worthy to me if I can engage this amazing tool we have, the novel, to bring readers into a bigger conversation with history, with the planet. And I think, I mean, and as we are such a small club, I think it's worth talking about how useful it is and how great it would be if more novelists would use fiction as a tool for informing readers about science, let's say, because, or about world. I mean, there are plenty of us. There are plenty of novelists who are engaging readers with the political scenario, with global politics, with socially engaged questions of the day. That's definitely the domain of the novelist now, and all the way back. But it's such a valuable tool for that because it does put the reader inside the brain of another human being. So it creates this empathy and this compassion and this, real human engagement with big questions in the way that journalism doesn't.
Yes, I agree. There's something magical about the novel. I put it into science fictional terms as a kind of a joke. It gives you telepathy. You're inside other people's thinking. Well, that's a rare experience. You're always interacting with other people. You're talking to them. They're even talking to you. But when you think, what's that person really thinking? Well, you don't know. So then when you read a novel, it's a fictional experience, but fictional experiences are quite vivid when they're done well. And then suddenly you can see what other people are thinking like. And that's the fascination. I'm surprised that more people don't read novels. I hear that it's, adults, maybe a quarter, maybe a third that will read novels. I'm thinking, if they don't read novels, they're missing out on 10,000 other lives. And how else are you going to get them?
Yeah.
And then time travel, of course, is the other thing. You're able to go to other times, other places, see what it was like there. And between telepathy and time travel, you have quite a powerful art form.
Yeah.
And the other art forms are great, music and art in particular, visual arts and music as being something strange and magical in its own way. But it's the novel, I think, that gives you that telepathic experience of other people's thinking.
Yeah, exactly. And how else, as a woman, it's a way for me to go inside the brain of a man, inside the body and the life of a man, and inside the body and the life of a person on another continent. Who wouldn't want that? Who should? I mean, it always amazes me that men are less likely to read fiction written by women or about women. And I'm thinking, you don't know what you're missing. This is your chance. You really need to know what it's like in here. It would help you be a better human. Just saying. But I like to talk about science fiction a little bit. I mean, speaking of what people read and don't read, I'm going to confess that I have spent most of my life as a science fiction averse reader. I mean, you are the great exception, but people told me for quite a while, you need to read Kim Stanley Robinson before I did, and I can explain that. I think it has to do with being female and being of my generation. Because, when I started reading science fiction, in my teens, think about what there was. It was men writing about technology projected hundreds or thousands of years into the future, and women were still wearing aprons and serving coffee. And it just, it carried right on. It was like, do you remember the first Star Trek?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
all men on the bridge except for Lieutenant Uhuru, who is wearing a mini skirt, and she's the telephone operator. And it just, like, it was really, really frustrating and depressing for me. I mean, even the first Star Wars movie, we have one female in the entire cast of thousands, one female, and she's a princess, and she's wearing a prom dress. So,
Yeah.
As a girl coming up, that was dangerously depressing for me to imagine that time was going to go on to infinity and nothing was going to get better. So, after a while, I did read Ursula Le Guin, and The Left Hand of Darkness blew my mind. So, I found the corners of the genre that were beautiful, and revealing to me. And I've found more and more of them. And now, of course, there are a lot of them. But I'm curious how you feel about, because I think we're approximately the same age. How you feel about this tradition and sort of how you found your place in it.
Well, thanks for that. And yes, I am a science fiction patriot, and that's a funny word to use given that it was so male-centric to begin with. And the so-called golden age of science fiction, which is really, when people say that, they're referring jokingly to the 30s and 40s. It was a male enterprise of basically engineers who weren't, they were smart, they were clever, and in some ways they were good writers, but they weren't particularly literary, and they were creatures of their time. They weren't thinking that the future was going to be different. So they perpetuated the world that they knew in ways that were pretty unreflective. So it took Le Guin and Joanna Russ and Kate Wilhelm, and Susie McKee Charnas. There's a generation of women that essentially arrived in the late 60s, early 70s, and that's just when I began to read it. And I had grown up in orange groves. I grew up in an agricultural community. Orange County, California was orange groves, but it was torn out 5 acres a day every day for 10 years.
Wow.
And then it was gone. And it was the city that's there, South Los Angeles kind of city scape, or suburbia, whatever you want to call it. It was changed. And so when I ran into science fiction, and I was maybe 18, a little late to the game because I'd been reading all along, but I didn't know science fiction existed. When I ran into it, I thought, that's my world. That is the literature that expresses how life feels to me. So I dove in at that point. And really, I would say Joanna Russ is even, Le Guin was a teacher of mine and a friend, and a kind of like a big sister figure or an aunt, very friendly, very stern, very compelling figure. I loved her. But Joanna Russ was the slap in the face. Like, guys, think about it, what it's like for the female man, which is the name of her famous novel. And indeed, it smacked me in the face. I laughed my head off. And it was part of my education as a feminist to be reading women science fiction writers in those years. And that introduced me to everybody else. So the field has grown with the world, but it's always, since the 70s on, I would claim that it's been, well, slightly ahead, but I say this as a boomer white guy. So what do I really know? It educated me, but it always felt to me like it was more diverse and more accepting of difference, weirdness, for sure, nerdiness, and disability than the rest of American culture. It was a bit of a leader in that regard, at least from my perspective.
Probably in part because you were reading well, whereas I was just kind of getting the popular stuff, sort of what came at me, because I wasn't seeking it out, after I set aside, not to name names, but those early guys. What came my way, on the big screen and so forth was just really not very good. Or not very insightful, just more guys conquering the world. But now belatedly, it's honestly it's an aversion that I've had to get over. But I really want to I want to urge the Ministry for the Future on everybody, because it's such a good book. And it's interesting how I think our genre have gotten more more flexible, and that really this book of yours is it really crosses a lot of lines between fiction and nonfiction.
Yeah.
And I mean, you get away with a lot in there. It's amazing. There's one whole chapter. I have to bring this up. There's one whole chapter that's well, I love how you never know who you're going to be talking to. Every chapter is kind of coming at you from a different place. It might be a carbon atom talking to you. It might be the market. It might be blockchain. Um, Writing a chapter from the point of view of blockchain. That, my hat is off to you. Finally, I think I understand what blockchain is, maybe. But there's one chapter that seems to be a meeting of NGOs, of grassroots environmental organizations from all over the world. Well, I work with a lot of those groups. I donate to a lot of those groups. I started recognizing these are real groups. I started looking up ones that I didn't recognize, and I realized they are all real. All of those organizations, and I don't know how many are there, 500 that you list?
Yeah.
They already exist. That was just a beautiful moment, a beautiful statement. And I think you even wrote somewhere in there, it says, "We are here. We are already here. We are already all around you." This is one of the most optimistic books about the future. It is not one of, it is it starts out really terrifyingly. It's very affecting and very horrifying to read about a future where the temperature has gotten too warm for human survival. So you learn what it is like to be in a whole city of people who are cooking. That's where we start. And I had to flip back to the jacket copy, and it said optimistic, and I just thought, oh Lord. But I kept going, and I had this. I don't know how to describe this except to use the word. It was almost like a nostalgia when I was, 3/4 of the way into the book, and things are starting to really happen and go well, and problems are being solved. And then, I would put the book down and go cook dinner, and then I would get sort of nostalgic. I wanted to be back in that book, and I was like nostalgic for a future. I wanted to live in that 2041 where things really are working out. And this book makes me believe that we actually could get there. Nobody's done that before, Stan. Nobody.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's
Well,
amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think I appreciate that very much, because I think that is a missing story in our culture, and that people want it badly.
Mhm.
And I can hardly tell you how many people have gotten back to me, and they often say, well, I already work in a ministry for the future. I work for thus and such. And this has been international, and everybody, I think, wanted that story, so that the particularities of it, the weirdnesses of it, the experiments that I did, trying to make a game out of it, because the subject material was so grim, because novels should be fun. And you're good at that too, to make sure that always you're more wanting to read that book than do anything else, because it's entertaining. So the game of forms, I was playing all these games, and it made for a weird book, experimental in some ways, which is most of my books are not like that. But I did it in this case, and what I'm finding is the particularities don't matter. People want that story, the story of things going well enough, but they can still believe in it. So a lot of bad things happen too, because a lot of bad things are coming down. But if we could, it's fighting against doomism that the young people feel, And we have the capacity socially and technologically to get to a good future where we don't cause a mass extinction event. That capacity exists, and everybody could be living at adequacy. We could be in a good world. So trying to describe that was, you know, strange, but the novel is the form, the art that you can do all this stuff. You can make a story that negotiates all those difficulties. So now I got a question for you. I loved so much listening to Prodigal Summer because you were the reader, and I could tell the different characters, and there you were. Um, what's that? I've never done that. You're great at it. What's that like? And like when you're reading your own book and you're being recorded, do you see things that you wish that you revised, or do you manage to stay focused? And what's it like? I mean, it must be kind of amazing.
Um, it is. I love doing my own audiobooks, and I'm so grateful that my publisher allows me to do it. It's very most novels are read by actors, but they let me do it, and so I keep trying to do a good job. And
Yeah.
I you go into the studio. They book 2 weeks in the studio because it does takes a
Yeah.
chunk of time. I usually knock it out in one
Mhm.
because unlike actors, this is what the director always tells me. A film actor will go in and want to read every sentence 3 times and then you take the best take. I don't want to do that. I'm more like a stage actor. It's more like, because we're used to doing readings
Yeah.
live. I want to go into a scene, get in character, and then just read all the way through. So they call me one take Barbara. I'll just, pretty much read the whole book without pause. But I love to do it for several reasons. One is, um, okay, you know what this is like. For the years that you're working on a book, you're going into your room, you're closing the door, and then you're having these conversations with these imaginary people in your head. You hear them speaking, you hear their voices, and you become very familiar. Like they are real. They give
Mhm.
people drugs for this, right?
No, I understand. I understand.
Yeah, we really hear these people, these voices in our head. So when I go into the studio, it's a kind of channeling and almost a kind of exorcism, both at once, to sort of just tap into that exact tonal quality, that accent, and replicate it. And when I'm finished, I feel like I've given my reader, my audiobook reader, listener, a product that's really, it's different from the book, and in some ways very special because it's my best representation of what I want those characters to sound like. And because particularly if the books are set in this region, which Prodigal Summer is,
Yeah.
I don't trust I don't trust anyone to get the accents right because,
Yeah.
well, Hollywood, famously, I live in Appalachia. I don't I Our accent is not the same as Georgia or Alabama or Texas. It's as different. We're as different from let's say Mississippi as the Bronx and Chicago. And they would never confuse those, in film. But because, rural people in the South are not very respected by American culture, you can go to a movie and three sisters in one family will be, sound like Texas, Alabama, and Tennessee, and nobody's supposed to know the difference. That drives me crazy. So I want to get the accents exactly right.
Yeah.
um I just want to do I want to I'm a little bit of a perfectionist, and I just want to do it right. So I love doing it, and I'm really really grateful that I get to do it.
Well, I loved it, and I got to say the accents work like a charm. You can do all of them, and like Lucia, she's a college educated from Lexington or whatever, and then there's the grumpy old man who's from down on the farm, and then there's also the people from that town, and the distinctions you were making. My dad's from Asheville, North Carolina,
Mhm.
and so I was hearing my dad's voice, which he had Californiaized through in his adult life, But when he got back home, when we would visit his people in Asheville, then he would fall back into it and I would listen to his relatives. And so the distinctions you were making were fabulous. They were part of the pleasure of it. And it's also sentence level stuff because the sentences have to be written right for the accent to sound right. And I can tell that the meticulousness of your sentence, they're very precise, they're very musical. I can tell you must revise, at least it seems to me that it takes me 10 or 15 or 20 drafts to get that kind of texture, a smooth flow, which you can tell when you're reading it, it flows. And also that you've paid attention at the sentence level very closely, which, some novelists do, some novelists don't. But I know what you mean about perfectionism. You dive into these novels, you're with them for a couple years or more. That whole time you're in a world of, well, I'm struggling to understand the story and the characters. And then, like, what's the difference between writing a novel and obsessive compulsive disorder? There is no difference,
No.
except there's a product at the end. Um,
Right. I think of it as a, we just try to keep it under control. And it's, when you live in that world, it's so compelling. As a working mother, I mean, my whole career, I've had children. And sometimes, it's funny, people, will ask you, how do you get yourself to, be disciplined and write? For me, it takes discipline to get up from the desk and go back into life, and to stop at the, when it was time to, when my kids were small and it was time to go pick them up from daycare, to come out of that world,
mhm.
and get in the car and drive. And sometimes I would get to the school and think, holy God, I know there are at least 5 stop signs between my house and here, and I don't remember one of them. You get so absorbed, it's hard to pop back out. But it's you have to love it. But yes, you're right about revision. I think that's I for me, revision is my favorite part of the
Mhm.
work.
Mhm.
Getting through that first draft is like hoeing a row of corn, like breaking ground. But then when you know where everything's going and how it's going to wind up, then to go back and just rewrite every sentence again and again and just angle everything
Yeah.
just so everything's pointing the way toward the end. You can seed pieces of the ending back through the beginning so that it's all there, and when you get to the end, when the reader gets to the end, they have that feeling like, I knew that's what was going to happen, but really they didn't. Well, that's the art, right, of
Yeah.
sort of filtering it all back through. So yes, I do a lot of revision. That's where I feel like art happens. To rewrite every sentence, every paragraph 50 times is the beautiful part. And to know when you're finished can be kind of a challenge. But I also I like to read passages aloud to myself. So just to hear the music of it. Ideally every passage of literature should be like poetry. It should be that attentive to language. And I mean, if you have the time to do it, why wouldn't you?
Yeah, I'm with you all the way. I think we have a somewhat similar working methods or regard
Mhm.
for the novel. First draft I can work about 2 hours and I feel thrashed and it's time to go away and garden. I do a vegetable garden and my wife was a hardworking chemist, and so I was a Mr. Mom, and our 2 boys, I would deal with the squeakers and then get back to it. But revision I can do as long as I'm awake,
Mhm.
because it's just tinkering with something you already have got a sense of. And what I do occasionally read things aloud. I'm not a reader of my own books for audiobooks, which I just love that you do that. I don't think I could, but I wouldn't mind trying. But the thing is that what I find happen is late in the game, you'll be reading some pages and you'll have this moment that's like, where did that come from? Because at no point along the way were you actually there. And so crunch, 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 struggle, 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 struggle. And some like 10th draft along, you're reading, go, wow, okay, that works. And so I can lay that to rest. And I know what you mean about not knowing quite when you're done, but I've regarded it now as it's a science thing, an asymptotic approach, where
Yeah.
when you realize you're 95 to 99% there, it's never going to get better without an infinity of effort. It's like Zeno's paradox. And at that point,
Right.
you give up.
Yeah. The law of diminishing returns.
Yes,
You
exactly.
reach a point where if you spend an entire day changing about 18 words and then changing half of them back to what they were before, you know it's time. And then
It's
there's also the editor that says, you know, Barbara, it's really time. So
yeah. Oh yeah. Deadlines help. Yeah.
I wanted to ask about methods. About I was kind of surprised that you were not trained as a scientist. So how have you apart from marrying a chemist,
Yeah.
how have you educated yourself as a scientist?
Well, I'm not. I'm an English major, and I
Mhm.
think that's very important. I love the canon. I love the history of English and American literature very, very much, and that's an infinite, a life's task. A life's joy. You can never run out of it. There's just
Mhm.
always more than you can read. And then when I got interested in science fiction, well, I married a scientist, but also it's a research project. It's a literary trick. You have to write the sentence. You don't have to understand the sentence. Like I don't understand blockchain, and I don't think I know anybody who does, except maybe a couple of people I've met in Silicon Valley. Maybe they understand it. Maybe they don't. I don't. But I can write sentences by a study of how scientists write sentences, reading their papers, reading the abstracts, the conclusions, the tables, and then it's a matter of pastiche. So, and you've done that like in your historical novels. I was looking through Lacuna this morning, preparing for this. That letters from people that don't sound like your style. It's a pastiche. You have to take on other people's voices than yourself as a
Mhm.
novelist.
Mhm.
Well, those are sentences on the page that you can manipulate till they feel right, and that's really what it comes down to. That and a lot of reading.
But they have to be right too. I mean, they have to be accurate, they have to be correct. I always think, you know, you have to be as smart as everybody in your novel. You can't just say, and then he said something clever about physics. You have to know what it was, you know.
It's
And
true.
I always feel lucky that I got to study, you know, chemistry and biology and zoology and physics in school, and I got to get my literature. I mean, those are my teachers behind me, just because that's fun to get an education in English literature, or in world literature is fun. But I'm not sure I would have had the discipline to get all the way through organic chemistry, you know, without those TAs, you know, and those professors and those exams and all that.
Yeah.
But then once I had all that, well, like a graduate degree in ecology and evolutionary biology, I had that knowledge of those principles, like the keystone predator principle and niche replacement, and all of these really interesting things about the way the world works and the way biological systems work. These natural laws that apply to us too, you know, which is a big part of our problem is we humans think we're exempt. We think that natural laws don't apply to us until, you know, the bill comes due and we find out, oh, heck, it did. So knowing all those principles, I always thought I would really like to write a novel that tells people, that teaches people what I learned in graduate school about ecology. So that was Prodigal Summer. That was my whole purpose in writing that novel, is to get those principles somehow explained. This is something I noticed, I would say I observed in grad school, is that when when you only partly understand a scientific principle, you can explain it in math, but you have to really understand it to explain it in English.
Yeah.
And that's what I wanted to be. I wanted to be that rare professor that could really explain uh, the keystone predator principle in the English language, not just with, you know, a blackboard full of equations.
Yes, and I saw that so clearly um, listening to Prodigal Summer, how you split it out amongst your characters so that Lucia is new to farming and needs to learn things. The cranky old man is a reactionary or has older beliefs, but he also has this witchy old woman friend who is and then you have your protagonist, the woman who is an ecologist, but she's also hanging out with a guy who may be a hunter, a kind of a uh, um, I don't like these people, the murdering other our cousin species for fun, but he's attractive in his own way. And so the way that you split out the elements involved in order to explain ecological principles in a tight plot of people who are intensely involved with each other, that's the novelist's skill and gift, I would say. It's really a gift to be able to coordinate articulate a big, complex subject, but turn it into characters that then even, and also a plot quite intense. Then well, this is why you're Barbara Kingsolver. There aren't that many of you.
Well, we all do the things we love best, but yeah, there are various ways, various tricks we have, right, of providing information in a way that doesn't feel like information. But I'm kind of, I'll come back to Ministry for the Future. I have it sitting here, that's why I keep looking at it, because it's become my friend, because I just spent happy hours with it. Here you are saying, I'm gonna maybe blow a little bit, here's a spoiler. This book explains how we get rid of capitalism, because it's not going to get rid of itself, and we're not going to get there with good intentions, because there are forces. It's like there are these driving forces that drive themselves that you cannot stop until you give them an ultimatum. So I see, if I tried to do, I've been accused my entire career of being too political, because I
Mhm.
s- because I just I think it's really interesting to sort of poke at these big questions and ask, how can we get from here to there without challenging the status quo? And I don't know whether it's a woman thing. I don't know whether I'm not supposed to be that ambitious or that large or assume any kind of moral authority, but I've gotten really, really tired over a 30-year career of being asked the same question over and over again, which is, what makes you think you're allowed to write about this?
Mhm.
And I wonder, do you get that question, and do you get panned sometimes because you have been too bold?
Oh yes, I would regard myself with some pride as a controversial novelist for being a leftist, and that isn't really where science fiction began, and also for going on at huge length about topics that aren't just relationships between people.
Mhm.
But it's a point of pride for me if I could make something out of it that people are still interested to read, and make it about characters in the end. So in ministry, it was a particularly challenging, but on the other hand, this is like novel 20 or something like that for me. And I thought, let's give it a try to describe, uh, and you're right, to describe capitalism turning into post-capitalism without a magical world revolution that succeeds, but more a stepwise progression of people blundering their way forward and coping with emergencies and yet coming up with a better system. And I have to say that the book came out in the middle of the pandemic, and people are changed by the pandemic. They're more open to this book. They know that the world's going to change on them in this next 10 years. And I'm seeing, my book is about habitat corridors and making room for the animals, as your gal would advocate in Prodigal Summer, because the Appalachians are one big habitat corridor already. Habitat corridors are now a thing, and governments are instituting them. Then also paying ourselves for doing the good things rather than the bad things. I see the central banks are working on, there's a network for greening the financial system. It existed, I didn't even know about it. So I thought I was making something up and it already existed. That happens to me a lot. And it's quite
Mhm.
beautiful, because if we actually make up new money, which everybody knows about quantitative easing now, we did it twice, 2008, 2020. You make up new money, it doesn't freak people out. It's just new money. If you make up that new money and give it to decarbonizing projects, to good ecological projects first, then it enters the economy as normal money. Well, you can kind of jujitsu capitalism into a more positive, earth-loving system. So that's what I described. And I think people are charged up by the idea that we could get there without some kind of French Revolution mass suffering that doesn't really work anyway. That
Mhm.
we could think our way out of it, that we could legislate our way out of it. People are encouraged at that thought.
One thing
Yeah.
I would love for both of us to talk about is you what you just brought up, which was the pandemic.
The pandemic was strange for me, has been strange, and we're still in it, of course. But what I'm saying is the year 2020, my normal life is I sit at home in my front yard and I write novels. And so I did that last year without having to travel anywhere, and it was kind of great. And also, everybody on Earth suddenly realized they're in a science fiction novel that we're all co-authoring together, and suddenly science fiction began to have more prominence in the culture. They came to me to ask what's going on. And I said, I don't know what's going on. Science fiction isn't about prediction. I had to explain, but for sure, more people were asking me about what do you think? Because now we realize we're in a science fiction story. And then you have to explain what science fiction is really about. That's complicated. But the main thing I want to say is that my son, who lives with us at home now, was working in a grocery store that whole time. He was an essential worker and a kind of hero for us. But we were also hugely exposed. He was exposed. We were therefore exposed because he came home to us. And my anger at the way the ordinary system works, the way people are treated to do what we now realize is essential work. We call them essential workers. We still pay them so little that they can't live off of it. So the injustice, the systemic injustice in our system that is basically class-based, the people who work for hourly wages versus the people who work for salaries, well, it's ugly and it needs to change. And we watched that, and it was great to feel that my son was a hero, but I also felt bad for him that he's like everybody else amongst the essential workers. The situation sucks, and we haven't yet gotten out of that.
Yeah. Yes, I agree with that. I have two daughters, two young adult daughters, and they too are essential workers. They had to keep going to work. One of them has two kids, and daycare. And well, actually, one of them, the younger one, was born in the middle of the pandemic, and the daycare situation, the childcare situation in this country, and what women are expected to do was really exposed by this pandemic, and we've seen this in immense disproportion of women who have not been able to go back to work because they had no options for taking care of their children. So I agree with you. This has laid bare a lot of the class injustices, the gender inequalities in our society. It's just things we already knew were there that have just been exposed and raw. So yeah, that makes me really angry, and I'm really glad that we have an extended family that has pulled together to take care. My 8-month-old grandson is here in the house right now. My husband is taking care of him at this moment. But in a funny way, my life has become much more social during the pandemic. I've had a house full of children and grandchildren, people coming and going. We're all in the same bubble. um, uh, Much more social than my life normally would be. But novelists are introverts. I've yet to, I've rare, I don't know if I've ever met a novelist who wasn't an introvert, because look, this is where we live, in a room by ourselves. We like this. We like to close the door and spend the great majority of our working hours alone in a room. So, for most of us, if you came and said, something's going to happen, you're going to have to stay at home and work and not travel anywhere for a year, we would say, yay, this is great.
Yeah.
So I mean, so this is the other side. I'm deeply sympathetic for all of the losses and the angers and the injustices and the lives lost. And I've lost people too, um, in this pandemic. But um, for someone who really likes to work at home, it's great. And for someone who, I mean, I think we're both in the same boat. We're asked continually to travel around the globe, fly around on airplanes to go talk to people about how we want a more sustainable society. This is such a hypocrisy, and it never fails to be upsetting to me. I feel like such a hypocrite when I go on a book tour. Even no matter what I do to try to relieve the carbon footprint, it feels wrong to me to have to travel as much as I do. So I love that the world has discovered meetings like this. I think probably the only reason we are meeting here, the two of us being the kind of people we are, is that we could do it by Zoom. I didn't have to get in an airplane and fly to Petaluma, um, because as much as I love people and as much as I love the people who organize these lecture series and their good intentions, flying around for meetings is such a it's just wrongful. So I'm glad that we've learned how to meet in other platforms. I hope this continues. I hope that some of the wisdom we've gained about how to be together without using airplanes will stick with us. And another thing I really hope for middle class people who have learned a lot about the difference between want and need, I hope this will stick with us. How possible it is to spend a whole year without getting on an airplane. How possible it is not to buy a lot of new stuff all the time. To think more about what we already have and what we can do with that is such valuable knowledge. Um, I'm really hoping that we come through this as a wiser species. For me, it's always about empathy and compassion. If I mean, every reader will carry away from a novel what that reader has brought, some factor of some formulation of what they brought to it, what they hoped for, and what they needed. But the common denominator, I think, is empathy. If we as novelists can help engage readers in this project of valuing other lives as we value our own, including the lives of people who haven't been born yet. That's the bottom line. When we can start thinking those people matter as much as we do, then we stop doing all the stuff we're doing that's killing their world.
I would agree with that. And what I would like fiction to do is make everybody, and I want to speak for utopian fiction, for utopian science fiction, there can be a better world. You read books, and then if they strike you right, you come out of it thinking there can be a better world and we have a responsibility to make it. If it could happen, it should happen. And then it is empathy that is the connection, that you think everybody's the same as me. I'm the same as everybody else. So you can flip it into a sense that, and until everybody on this planet is at adequacy and feeling okay, has a chance at happiness, then we're all stuck in the, until that happens, then we're stuck in an ugly culture and have that underlying our daily lives. And fiction can help with that. Fiction is part of that project, a big part, I think. Well, it was kind of a mind boggler. I have to say, I was really pleased. I admire the man. He had a great 8 years and is a model citizen, as a husband, father. the idea that he read the book, given his experiences and given what the Ministry for the Future is about, with an official, a minister as the main character, I thought, whoa, if he liked it, I must have faked it correctly, and done the novelist's thing. And also there's some presidents are given hard choices. And so when he came across certain passages in the book, I was very curious. I wonder what he thought about that. And I'll say that I got about 50 emails in about 5 minutes. So that I learned about it one morning. I was thinking, why is my inbox exploding? But then I understood.
Thank you for bringing it up. This is something that's really exciting to me. In around 1999, I think it was after the Poisonwood Bible was. I think probably Oprah had something to do with the fact that suddenly my books were, read much more widely, and I was getting more royalties than my family needed, and I wanted to do something valuable with that. I'm always, happy to donate to people who are doing good in the world. And I just thought, how could I help create careers for more novelists who want to do good in the world through literature? And so I consulted with a bunch of people and figured out how to do this. And so this is something that's unique about this prize, is it's meant to be a career founding award. There are plenty of prizes that are given to people who are already, well known, and they're doing fine as novelists, and it's like, nice pat on the back, there you go. But this is different. For this prize, we read manuscripts from people who want to be writers, but they have not yet published a novel. So this is a first novel prize, and reading manuscripts is a lot harder, let me tell you, than reading, books that are already published, that have already been, sort of edited, and there's a culling process that has already, a winnowing process, we'll say, has already happened. We take manuscripts, and we have readers who sort through them, and then they go to our judges. But the winning manuscript, and we do it every 2 years to give time for this whole cycle. The winning manuscript is given a prize of $25,000 plus a guarantee of publication, and they work with a partner publisher, which for a number of years has been Algonquin Press, and an editor there, Kathy Porries, who works with the writer to bring it. These are sometimes diamonds in the rough, but they are diamonds, and so they are brought to publication. So that writer becomes an author, a published author. This book is published, with some cachet, and those writers have, and now over the years there are 10 or more of these authors who are now socially engaged literary authors, and I'm proud of every one of them, and they have all gone on to do more work. And that's what I want, is more writers in the world who believe, as we do, that fiction is a way to change the world. The definition of socially engaged literature is something we could talk about for another hour, but fundamentally, what struck me, and the reason I wanted to make a prize that specifically rewards this kind of literature, is that we are operating at a deficit in the United States of America. If you look around the world at other countries and the writers they honor, Doris Lessing, Pablo Neruda, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Milan Kundera, other cultures have always looked to their literary writers as the bellwethers of society, the people saying, as Stan just said, if it could be better, it should be better. That's a very normal thing in the rest of the world. But as I mentioned earlier, for most of my career, the first question I encounter is, what makes you think you can write about this stuff? You know, a better world. Who do you think you are? I think that we're still getting over this divorce that happened in the 1950s with the McCarthy era, where politically inclined artists were shut down in a terrifying way. And we, you know, if you look before that, you know, we had John Steinbeck, we had this kind of compelling sort of American canon that just got shut down. And it's been very quiet for a lot of years. It's starting to bubble up again. I think we're seeing again a pride in this kind of socially engaged literature. But it's been a long quiet spell. And so I wanted a prize that specifically says, not only can we create this kind of literature, it's cool, it's good stuff.
Yes, and it's very relevant because I'm looking also at Barbara's book, Animal, Vegetable, Miracle, and because I'm writing a nonfiction book. And what I'm finding is that I'm lost, I'm at sea. As a novelist, you have orientation. You got your characters and your plot, and you know, and chronological order helps, etc. So this is a book about backpacking in the Sierra Nevada. It's part history, part backpacking guide, part geology, but a big part memoir, because it's been an important part of my life. It's the only part of my life that I'm at all interested in writing about, to tell you the truth. And I'm not, as a novelist, I would say the memoir is a kind of a category error of, I don't care about your real experiences because they're random and arbitrary. I want novels and I want plots. But this book on the Sierra Nevada has captured me, and I realized that if I'm going to write about it, I have to make it personal, and why my life up in those mountains, tromping around, and not climbing. So not danger, not macho, go up there and die in a snowstorm, but just wandering like Thoreau or any wandering person appreciating nature. Why that's so important and beautiful. So I'm deep in it. I'm struggling hard. It's a mess.
I have just in last fall published a collection of poetry, and I've just finished, kind of doing the Zoom book tour for that. And I have been since early last year working on a novel. It's set in Southern Appalachia in pretty much the current times, and it's looking at the opioid epidemic, but in an unusual way. It's a hard subject to get people to care about. Rural people are very, very much undervalued and underrepresented in our culture. So it's really about the modern rural experience and what's beautiful about it and what's hard about it.
I want to add something just in case we're about to end, which is just thank you to the Pasadena Literary Alliance. I spent my, from years of age of 3 to age of 5 in Sierra Madre and in Pasadena. My parents were living there before we moved to Orange County. I just want to thank you and thank Pasadena is a great literary hub of the universe, and it's good to be associated with y'all.
I agree. Thank you so much for this fantastic opportunity to meet one of my literary heroes, and to have this wonderful meeting with no carbon footprint. And thanks for everything you're doing there in Pasadena for literature.